Okay, tonight we're going to try to get Lazarus out of the tomb finally. He's been waiting in there a few weeks, but I think we'll get him out tonight. And we're in John chapter 11. Last week we got to the most famous verse, the shortest verse in the Bible, verse 35, Jesus weeping. And again, just to reiterate a little bit about last week's class, Jesus here was no doubt weeping because of the sadness of the people that were around, Mary and Martha and all of those people that were comforting her, recognizing what he was going to do in raising Lazarus. He wasn't weeping because Lazarus was gone, because he wasn't going to be gone for long, but rather he was responding in sadness because of those around him, which would be a lesson well taken for us as well. So verse 36 and verse 37 is just concluding what we started. Really tonight I want to start in verse 38. But verse 36, there's a little question as it relates to these last two verses right here. Verse 36, then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." And again, making reference to Jesus weeping. And again, I don't know. They're not privy to the information that was about to happen. So they must have concluded that he was crying as a result of the loss of Lazarus. And I don't really think, I mean, he was angry. We recognized that last week, and he groaned in his spirit, and he was angry, and he wept. But that weeping was not the kind of wailing that the others were involved in. In fact, these were a shedding of tears. So they said in verse 36, "See how he loved him," and that much he got right, because Jesus did love Lazarus. He was, a beloved worker, and Jesus was very familiar with that family. And then verse 38, then Jesus, again groaning in himself. I'm sorry, verse 37. That's where I want to start, is verse 38. Verse 37, and some of them said, "Could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind also have kept this man from dying?" And I don't think that that this was like a slap at Jesus. I think, again, these individuals that are saying this, are sad. And it's kind of like, it's kind of like when Mary and Martha both said, "Jesus, if you'd have been here, our brother wouldn't have died." It's kind of like that. And again, I don't think this is a slap, because certainly Jesus could have kept him from dying had he wanted to, with just a thought. But again, I think everybody is just, they're sad. They've lost Lazarus, and everybody's, it's just a bad situation, and everybody's unhappy. And here's Jesus. And then verse 38. Then Jesus, again, groaning in himself. This is the same phrase that is used up in verse 33. He groaned in the spirit. So he groaned within himself. He's angry again. And it's not like he's like groaning because, he doesn't have the strength, but he is groaning because he's angry. Because, all of this is taking place, and he groaned in himself and came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. So here's the deal, and there's the cave, or a Mizpah, as the Jews would call it, a tomb or a grave, and Lazarus was in there. We don't know. Sometimes it was the case where the Jews would bury a lot of people in one tomb or one grave, and they would encase them and you know, and kind of stack them up. Even today in Israel, outside the city of Jerusalem, there's all of these giant, they look like cement buildings, but they're graves. I mean, they're crypts. And they keep stacking them on each other, and they're everywhere. And you're outside of Jerusalem, and you look on, like from the Mount of Olives, you're on the Mount of Olives, and you look over to Jerusalem, and the whole valley, the valley there is filled with these graves. And if you're a very prominent or a wealthy Jew, you can buy one of those things and have it ready for you. Because, you know, they think that, you know, that Jesus, that the Messiah is going to come there and rescue everybody, and you can buy one of those things and have your place all ready over there, but it costs a lot of money because there's not much room left over there. And so they just keep stacking them up. But anyway, here we are at the crypt, or at the tomb, and it was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Again, so it's sealed. Verse 39, Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Move the stone. And notice the reaction here of Martha. Martha, the sister of him who was dead, said to him, "Lord, by this time there is a stench, for he has been dead 4 days." And I like the King James rendering of this. "Surely he stinketh." I think that's what the King James says, doesn't it? Surely he stinketh. And that's true. He's been dead 4 days, and you know, in that climate over there, it's hot, and it's warm, and surely the body has started to decay and would have a smell or an odor. And it's something that you really wouldn't want to move that stone. But watch this. She thinks that Jesus probably is there, and Jesus saying, "Move the stone," because watch, he's weeping, right? He's weeping, and he's groaning within himself. And, you know, that's kind of like when you see someone do that, or, you know, recognize that someone's like, oh. You know, you're thinking, you know, he's emotional, and he just says, "Move the stone." What do you think they think he wants to do? What would you do? Have you ever seen anybody, like, at a funeral come in? What do to the body? What do they want? They want to see it. They want to see it. You know, I've seen people kiss bodies, and they're not in there, but the body's there, and touch them, and, you know, hug them, and all of that stuff. No doubt, this is what Mary thinks Jesus is going to do. He says, "Move the stone," and she says, "Wait a minute, Lord. He's been in there 4 days. You don't want to see that. You know, you definitely don't want to go in there or look at Lazarus, for he has been dead 4 days." And then notice Jesus' response. Now Jesus is starting the reason that he came to the tomb, the reason that he wants the tomb open. In verse 40, he says, "Did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God?" You're about to see the glory of God. Now, do not misunderstand with what Jesus is saying here with the denominational concept of you have to believe before a miracle can happen. That's not the point that Jesus is making here, but yet there's a lot of people in our religious world today that have the concept that unless you have faith, you can't witness or experience a miracle. You ever talk to anybody like that? Tony, I know you have. Or you don't have enough faith. Yeah, and I know I've told this story before, probably here, but there's some here that haven't heard it again. It's a good one, because I've got a real good friend, Holger Neubauer, that is rather, oh, this is on film, isn't it? So I hope he's listening. He's rather exuberant in his preaching and his whole life. He's out there, right? He's on the edge. And one time when we were first converted, we were talking to a Pentecostal preacher, and Holger went in and he got a kitchen knife, and he says, "Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to cut my finger off, and you're going to put it back on." And the guy says, and Holger went in, he got a knife, and he's about to, and the guy says, "Don't do that, don't do that." And he said, "Why not?" He says, "Because you probably don't have enough faith for me to do that. If you're willing to cut your finger off, you obviously don't have enough faith for me to put it back on." Holger said, "Okay, well, we'll cut your finger off then. If you say you could do that," and of course, that didn't go over well at all. Jesus here is not, look it, did I not tell you, or did I not say to you, that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God? Well, he said that to her. Remember, he asked her, "Do you believe?" And she said, "Yes, Lord, I believe, that you're going to raise my brother in the resurrection." But the belief here is not contingent upon Jesus performing this miracle. It's simply a discussion. This verse, I've heard denominational people who have this concept of miracles still existing today will use this verse and say, "Look, you've got to believe, then you're going to see the glory of God." That's not what he's saying. She's going to see the glory of God no matter what. But Jesus is about to raise Lazarus, and he's going to come out of that tomb. He wants her and everyone there in that scene to recognize this is God performing this miracle. This is God's power. This has nothing to do with the people there or Lazarus or anybody else. This is God showing the power that has been given Jesus to claim who he says he is. Okay? Comments? Anybody? I see him. Okay. All right. So, did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God? Verse 41. Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying. Notice how John puts that. Where the dead man was lying. Signifying that Lazarus is what? Thank you. You got it. You are on for a Wednesday night. That signifying that he's truly dead. 4 days in the tomb, dead. John says that they put the stone away from the place where the dead man was laying. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me." Jesus is praying to the Father, and he's got his eyes toward heaven, and he's praying out loud. He wants everyone that's near to hear what he's saying. Okay? Verse 42. And notice here, there is no pomp or circumstance or, a lot of silliness or, I want to say wizardness, but that's really not a word. There's not a lot of that stuff going on. I can't think of what I'm trying to say, but simply Jesus is just praying, huh? Hoopla. There's a good. I couldn't have said that better myself. Not a whole lot of hoopla going on. Jesus is looking up to heaven, and he says, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me," which signifies what? You have heard me. Past tense meaning what? The deal is done. It's done. Jesus knows what's about to happen. The deal is done. And, verse 42, and I know that you always hear me, but because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me. This whole miracle is done so that it was confirmation that Jesus is the Messiah. That's the reason this whole thing is happening right now. To prove that Jesus is the Son of God and God the Father sent him as the Messiah. This is the purpose of that. Let's see if I wrote anything down. Nope. Okay. Verse 43. Yes. Absolutely. Good point. Tony just pointed out that we need to recognize the humbleness and the humility of Christ in this. Because actually, who's going to tell Lazarus to come out? He is. But again, he wants everyone to he wants all of the glory to go to the Father. Because, watch, the Jews believed in Jehovah. They worshiped God, right? But they weren't buying that this guy, Jesus of Nazareth, was the Messiah. They weren't buying that. So again, if Jesus could reflect what he's doing, this miracle, reflect it for the people that are there to understand that this power that Jesus has is a result of God giving it to him, it would be more beneficial for the belief of those that saw the miracle. Okay? Good. And he was humble in this. He didn't take any of, like, if the normal person would have done this, look what I did. I'm about to bring this guy out of this grave, and I want you to check this out. Well, none of that. Okay? 43. Now, when he had said these things, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And I wrote down here in my notes, I said, deaf? Question mark. Why did Jesus, what you think, was Lazarus in the back of the tomb? So he had to yell at him? Or what do you think the purpose of the loud voice was all about? That's what he wanted. He wanted everybody to know what's about to happen. And again, Lazarus, could you imagine being there? I would love to have been there to see this. Lazarus. First of all, you've got the people. If I'm there and I'm standing by Martha or Mary and Jesus says, move the stone away, I'm backing up. Because, can you imagine 4 days? And I've been over there. It's hot. And 4 days. And, he calls the stone away and he looks up and he prays. And then all of a sudden he cries out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. Come out of there. And this is in the imperative tense in the original language, in the Greek language, which is a command. He didn't say, hey, Lazarus, come here. He said, Lazarus, it's imperative. Lazarus, come forth. Verse 44. And he who had died, notice that, he who had died. Again, a reiteration of the fact that Lazarus was dead. All right? He was dead. Then he who had died came out, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said to them, loose him and let him go. If he was wrapped head and foot, how'd he get out? Huh? Hopped? I never thought of that. I was trying to figure, that's a good one. He probably could have done that. What else? How else? Could have shuffled, yeah. I was thinking that maybe that they weren't so tight that he couldn't move. I was reading one guy said that this was part of the miracle, that he just kind of came out, that he just kind of defied gravity and moved out. I don't know. Who could know that? Here's the point. He came out, and he still had his grave clothes on. So, I want you to get the picture of what he wasn't in. Okay, when you picture somebody in the Middle East being put in a tomb, what do you see in your mind? Yes, this isn't that. This is different from that. That's what I see. You know, you think he's bound with hands and foot, but he's not mummified. The Jews did not mummify their bodies. They would wrap them in like grave clothes, cloths, like I want to kind of almost say pajama kind of things. But then they would wrap their face and their hands, you know, and the parts that they needed to stay stiff. But it wasn't that he didn't come out like the mummy. All right, so don't picture that, because that's not what they did, you know. So here he comes. He comes out, and his face was wrapped with a cloth. You know, it wasn't like, you know, like the mummy. He came out, and he had his face wrapped in a cloth. And Jesus said unto him, "Loose him and let him go." So he commanded some human there, or a group of human, or somebody, to let him out of all that. You know, let him loose. Cut him loose. Let him go. All right, comments? All right, I want us to talk about this before we get to verse 45. And it's important that we recognize this. I'm going to ask a question, and I want you to think about it before you answer. Was Lazarus resurrected? Or was he resuscitated? Jesus was resurrected. Lazarus was resuscitated. The definition of resurrection is to be given an eternal body. Now, when those that remain on the earth at the second coming, we're going to be changed. What's going to happen in that change? We're going to go from a spiritual, or from a physical body to a spiritual body, which means an eternal body. When we're in the grave, when we're resurrected, those that are in the grave, what's going to happen? They die corruptible, but they're raised incorruptible. That's resurrection. All right? 8 times in the Bible, there are people who have died who have been resuscitated. But the difference is, when you're resurrected, you don't die anymore. When you're resuscitated, you die again. Lazarus was resurrected. When Jesus was resurrected, did he have his grave clothes still on? Remember? Where were they? They were still there in the tomb. All right? Lazarus comes forth. He's still got his grave clothes on. Because why? He's going to die. He's going to need him again. He's going to die again. Every time that someone died in the Bible, in the Old Testament and the New Testament, they always died again. Or, I'm going to say they died again. All right? When they're resurrected, they're not going to die anymore. They're going to be eternal. Jesus was resurrected. Well, what's the difference between resurrection of Jesus and what happened to Lazarus right here? When Jesus resurrected, he's not going to die, and he got his eternal body, and he's back to being deity again. Lazarus is going to die again. That's the difference. So, when we think about that, it makes it easier to understand how important Jesus' resurrection was in regards or in relation to those human beings, the 8 of them that were resuscitated or raised, if you will. Raised is okay. That's a good terminology. Raised to die again. Okay? All right, so watch. There are 2 reactions to this. And brethren, this is so applicable to our life today and the truth of the Word of God when it is spoken, when it is taught. Watch. 2 reactions. Verse 45. Then many of the Jews who had come to Mary, the reason that they were there was because of Mary and Martha, to come to comfort them and to bewail their brother. Then many of the Jews who had come to Mary and had seen these things Jesus did, believed in him. Now, it wasn't their purpose. Think about this in terms to our own salvation and our own how we're converted. Many times, and if you talk to people, maybe most of the time when people obey the gospel or when they hear the gospel or their lives are changed because of the truth of Christ, they didn't come for that reason. You know why I went to the Church of Christ for the first time? It wasn't to get converted. It's because I knew there was a lot of cute girls down there. That's exactly the truth why I went. And there was one for sure. And so that's the reason I went. But a funny thing happened on the way down to the church building, or the way out of the church building. Truth was taught. And you know, a lot of people, think about your own life. When you're converted, or when you realize the truth of God's Word, you didn't mean to realize that. You didn't go looking for that. And here is another illustration of many of these people. They came to comfort Mary. They saw this miracle, and all of a sudden, they believe in Christ. Because they witnessed the truth, and the truth had such an impact on them, even though they weren't looking for it, it impacted them and caused them to believe. Okay? Watch. So many of the Jews who had come to Mary, had seen these things that Jesus did, believed in him. But notice the next verse. There it starts with the contrast. But how could there be any other reaction than what we just read in verse 45? I mean, you talk about the biggest miracle that can happen. You can't fake that. Nobody in that audience thought for a moment that was a rigged situation. But yet you had some people believe the truth, but verse 46, but some of them went away to the Pharisees and told them the things that Jesus did. Now this was outright meanness. Can you imagine being so hard and mean and just ugly? How could you witness that miracle and see Jesus giving the glory to the Father beyond a shadow of a doubt what just happened there, and run directly to the Pharisees, knowing that the Pharisees were hunting for Jesus anyway? Go and tell them about it. Man, those people are going to be in trouble, or are in trouble now. So many of the Jews some of them went away to the Pharisees and told them all the things that Jesus did. So there was faith in one reaction, and then opposition in the second reaction. And this is the same reaction that you have existing in the world today. You present the truth, the message of God, in its entirety, in its clarity, in its simplicity, in all the power that it has in itself. Some people believe it, and some people oppose it, no matter what. Jesus himself performed this miracle, and it was opposed. It was opposed. Comments? Good. Let me finish then. How are we looking? Oh, we're okay. All right. Verse 47. This is after the people went back and told the Pharisees. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered a council. So they got together and said, hey, we got to get together and discuss this. We got to have a council. We have to figure out what's going on here. So they had a council. Everybody got together, which was good because there was a consensus involved. It wasn't just a couple rogue Pharisees. We even had the high priest convening this and taking action against this Jesus who just performed this miracle that no one could deny. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered a council and said, what shall we do? Isn't that ironic? Isn't that phrase ironic? Because that phrase is used somewhere else. Where? In Acts chapter 2, when the Jews who were convinced that Jesus is the Son of the God, and they crucified him, and the blood of him is on their hands, when they realized that, they cried out and said the same thing that these Pharisees are saying, but in a total different way. Total different way. Opposite way. What shall we do? For this man works many signs. What did they just do right there in that phrase? Well, they blasphemed, yeah, but what did they do regarding the truth of Jesus? They just admitted it. They just admitted what Jesus did was true. So it was undeniable fact that Jesus just raised Lazarus from the dead. Look at that. What shall we do? For this man works many signs. It didn't say he was a charlatan or he was a fake musician or a false prophet. This man works many signs. And notice what they say. If we let him alone like this, everyone will believe in him. That would be really good, wouldn't it? Everyone would believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and nation. What are they concerned about?
They're more concerned about the institution and their power and glory than they were the truth.
Yeah. The place that they're talking about is the temple. If we let this guy alone, if we let him out there, the Romans are going to hear this. They're going to come take the temple. They're going to come take our temple and our nation. It wasn't their nation, was it? Whose nation was it? And is it? God's nation. And they were supposed to be representing God as the hierarchy of his religion. And here they are second guessing, and actually what happens is exactly what they prophesied here, but the other way around. They crucified him, and the Romans still came in, took the temple and Jerusalem. Still took it. No doubt with the help of God after that. So anyway, very good. We'll pick up there with Caiaphas next week, the high priest, and notice what he says. All right, very good.